If you think that we're doing a good job on the coronavirus, you should think again. We're doing a terrible job. If you think that you can follow the science, good luck, because this science was reported through the filter of the media, and the media told you the wrong science. So do you believe the science when the media describes it wrong? Are you worried about this new virus strain? Now, the experts say that the vaccinations might work against the new one, but they're saying that it's more viral but possibly less deadly. Quick, is that good or bad? If you think that we're doing a good job on the coronavirus, you should think again. We're doing a terrible job. I'm in California. Think of this. I'm in California, and one of the most sophisticated healthcare organizations going, which is why I use it. Kaiser's actually a tremendous organization. I compliment them all the time, at least the one I use. But they couldn't get me a test. Not me, it was somebody else. But they couldn't get a test in 1 week. A result? Come on. It feels like not even trying, honestly. Here's another report in fake news. You may have seen a story that said there was a study at OSU. They studied 26 college athletes and found out that several of them had, ones that had coronavirus, and said that they had myocarditis. Myocarditis. So an issue with your heart that could be quite serious. Now, so that's what the news reported. So, if the news reports that these college athletes had an unusually high number of heart-related problems that could even be permanent. I don't know how permanent these are, but shouldn't that tell you, oh my goodness, that's a big problem, right? But then you read the follow-up story, and one of the people involved in the study says, well, you should probably point out that the way they tested for this myocarditis is using a different technology than it is normally looked for. So they used a more sensitive imaging. So the first thing you need to know is, what would happen if you just randomly picked athletes and gave them this more sensitive test that is not the normal one that you would do for myocarditis? It's going to pick up more small nuances. Is that maybe the whole story? That you just tested in a more sensitive test, so it looks like there's more of them, but no, it's just a more sensitive test? I don't know, and I won't claim that's the case. I'm saying that I feel like that was an important fact that was left out of the original reporting. And then, of course, there are only 26 people studied, and, that's not enough to make a claim. It wasn't a controlled study, blah, 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 blah. So I just don't know what weight to put on that. It's enough to scare me, but if you think that you can follow the science, good luck, because this science was reported through the filter of the media, and the media told you the wrong science. So do you believe the science when the media describes it wrong? Because that would be smart, according to Democrats, right? According to Democrats, if there's real science that's described completely wrong by a journalist, you should trust it. The completely wrong interpretation. Because that's trusting science. According to Democrats, they believe that's what they're doing. What I believe I would be doing in that case is listening to a journalist who has almost no chance of correctly interpreting science. Let me give you an example. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal recently about hypnosis. It was talking about using hypnosis for quitting cigarettes and stuff like that. Now, I, as a trained hypnotist, read the article in the Wall Street Journal, and I could tell that almost every part of it was wrong. Almost all of it. Pretty much everything they thought they understood about hypnosis and what it can and cannot do, all of it wrong. But did you know that? If you read that article, could you tell the difference? Because you're not a hypnotist, right? You probably read the article and said, yeah, that looks pretty good to me. So keep in mind, it's the Murray-Gell-Mann amnesia, that's called, when the experts can tell the news is fake, but other people can't. All right. What do you make of the fact that California has some of the strictest COVID restrictions, but at the same time, they're not doing that well? There are other places that are, doing worse. But California has most restrictions, but it doesn't seem to be helping as much as it should. What do you make of that? Here's what I make of it. Having harsh restrictions in place has no correlation with what the people are actually doing. Now, if you had told me that Californians do the best job of conforming to the guidelines and restrictions, then I'd say, whoa, this is telling me something. Because we've got big restrictions, but it doesn't seem to be having a big result, at least one that's obvious just by eyeballing it. You can't really tell unless you've done a controlled study. But when you eyeball it, just look at the graph, you're like, I can't tell if this is working at all, right? But here's the part that they leave out. Don't tell anybody, but Californians are not socially distancing. They're not. Where is the biggest infections coming from? Well, not restaurants, they're closed. Not movie theaters, they're closed. The biggest infections are coming from households that are not socially distancing from other households. In other words, the blending of households within the house. Do you know how much social distancing there is in California among households? Close to none, right? The only thing that matters really is whether you're blending households at this point. Because we know that people do wear masks to use the grocery store because they kind of have to, right? So we know they're not getting it from touching things in public because surfaces don't seem to be the big problem. It's got to be households. And it's got to be blending households. It's got to be the blending part, right? My observation as a Californian is that at least for young people, I think people are still trying to keep the old people safe. But among the young, the households just gave up on social distancing. Is that what you see? I don't see households stopping a teenager from visiting another household. I just don't see that. Yeah. And somebody's saying divorced parents. Does California have more two-household situations than anybody else? I don't know, but we might. We might have the most cases where there's a kid who has to go back and forth from mom and dad to a different household. I don't know. So when you say that there's a state that has the most restrictions, I just don't know that that matters anymore, because I think people gave up on it. That's what I observed. People just gave up on it. And I think that the news that asymptomatic people are not the big spreaders and that young people aren't having as bad outcomes, I think you put those two things together, that you need to be symptomatic and it probably won't kill you as likely if you're young. And I think households just made the decision. I can't go another month keeping a teenager locked up. I think people just said the risk-reward is now reversed. Early on, yeah, lock up everybody. Because you thought it was just going to be maybe a month or something. Yeah, lock up the teenagers, lock up the kids, lock up the schools. If we can kill this thing in a month, that's a good deal. But once you realize you can't, and that it's going to be a year or whatever it's going to be, maybe longer, you can't really keep the teenagers locked up anymore. So I think we should stop pretending that social distancing is even happening, because it isn't. It's happening in public places, the grocery store, but it's not happening in homes. People just stop doing it, I think. I think that's the whole story. All right. Are you worried about this new virus strain? Now, the experts say that the vaccinations might work against the new one, but they're saying that it's more viral but possibly less deadly. Quick, is that good or bad? Can you tell? Is it good or bad that there's a second strain of the virus that's spreading rapidly, but it seems less deadly? I don't know how much less. They say less. That could mean anything. Less deadly but more viral. Good or bad? Can't tell, can you? Yeah, I'm seeing goods, and I think you're saying it's because there will be more natural herd immunity, and if it's less deadly, you'll get to if it spreads more and it's less deadly, maybe you get to some kind of herd immunity of the variant that might work against the original? Probably, because they're still close enough that if you got antibodies to the variant, I would imagine, this is not confirmed, but I'd imagine you'd have antibodies sufficient to the other one. So this is another example of where we can't tell good news from bad news. I hear this news and I'm like, is that good or bad? I don't know, because I don't know that the vaccinations will ever get us to herd immunity. I don't know. Here's another question I have. When you're trying to decide who to give it to first, should we have government rules about who gets it first? Or would we be better off if we said to everybody, look, you make your own decision? Which would get you to a better outcome? The government with strict guidelines of who gets it first, or just let everybody decide on their own? Now, I think that's unclear. Israel is doing something closer to letting people decide on their own. I think they have some guidelines, but they're doing way less filtering. So I think if you go in and you say you need it, probably going to get it. Now here's the problem. If you have government guidelines, they're never going to fit your situation. Am I right? Let's say you've got somebody in your household who's 25, and they're just not socially distancing. They're totally healthy. They should be the last person to get the vaccination, right? But what if they're not doing any social distancing and there's nothing that's going to change that? They're dating on Grindr, or they're dating on, some app, and they're mixing with other people every day. Shouldn't that perfectly healthy person get it first? Because they're not going to socially distance. And if they're not socially distancing, they're the problem. They're the one who gets in your household. Right? If you vaccinate grandma, well, she wasn't going anywhere anyway. And I could probably get her to stay home, and I could probably get her to socially distance. But I can't get the 25-year-old to do it. They just won't do it. So do the math for me. Just for a moment, forget about the morality and the ethics of it. Right? Because I'm going to say that whatever gets us to pass the pandemic fastest might be the best result. I don't know that that's true. But I feel as if you let people make their own decisions, you might optimize. Because people know their own situation better than you do. And here's the other factor that isn't picked up in any kind of a checklist. The psychological part. Do you believe that there are people who are psychologically deeply damaged by what they feel is their risk compared to other people who are just handling it better psychologically? Of course. The mental health element of this is gigantic, and how is that going to be picked up on a checklist? Are you going to put on the checklist, I'm way worried about the virus and it's ruining my life, versus, I'm not too worried. I know it's bad, but I just don't worry too much. Because the amount you're worried about it is a really big factor. Take me, for example. I'm worried about it, and I'm at an age and I've got a comorbidity that I think I'd be in maybe the next wave of who's approved to get it, or maybe the one after that. But I'd be in the top third of people who would get it. But if you ask me to make my own decision, I might wait a little longer. And the reason I would wait a little longer is maybe I thought I could socially distance better. Because let's say if Christina got the vaccination, and I only have close contact with her, do I need it right away? I'm not saying she would get it right away, but I'm just using an example. So there are so many specific weird situations where you would have to include what people are likely to do, socially distance or not, what their mental state is, what they know about their own comorbidities, what they know about whether they can socially distance well or not. I think maybe you just let people make their own decision. I could tell you that I would voluntarily wait a little bit longer than I will under the current guidelines. So I just put that out there.